So we are, and you'll need something to write with, and you need to be writing this stuff down because this will be your homework that you are going to submit. So, this is a second grade class. Okay. And I have 5 different instruments placed around the room. Are we good there? And these instruments are made up of different materials. They might be homemade instruments, they might be real instruments. Okay? So I have at least one instrument that's representative of each instrument family that we talked about a few weeks ago. So I'd have at least one string, one percussion, probably 2, one brass, and one woodwind instrument in the room. So my woodwind instrument could be a Coke bottle. Think about it that way. My brass instrument could be a tube that they could, like a didgeridoo almost, that they would have to buzz their lips to play into. Okay? My string instrument could be like a homemade banjo that I've made with like a bucket and like a 2x4 and some strings. My percussion instrument could be like a hand drum or something else that I've made, okay? Like a rain stick or something. So, I'm going to divide the students, and you'll need to write all these steps down. These are not for you to answer these questions. These are for you to write down the steps because you're actually going to be making up the lesson plan in class today for this lesson that I'm talking you through. Okay? So, the first thing is I have to get what? The instruments put out. Yeah? And then I'm going to divide the group, the class up into pairs or threes. There's not a lot of them at each thing. So, and I'm going to have them at each instrument. So we have 5 different instruments, correct? So, and if I have them in like threes, that's 15 students in my class. Sure, we'll go with that. There's 16 of us in here, why not? So the first thing that they're going to do is they're just going to observe the instrument. They're just going to look at it. They're not going to try and play it yet. Okay? So they're going to like answer these questions, and I'll have a list of these questions at every single station for them to answer. They're not going to write anything down though because they're in 2nd grade. They're just going to observe. So what is the instrument made of? Can you guess what each part does? How do you think it will sound when it's played? So, and they're going to spend 1 minute at each station, and they're going to rotate. So if we have 5 instruments, and we have 5 different stations, how much time are we going to spend on that activity?
5.
Thank you, yes. Good morning, 5 minutes on that one activity. That's important for later. So once they get back to their original instrument that they started with, they're going to have a chance to play it. So they're going to spend 2 minutes, and they're going to, it should be a predict and evaluate for step 2. So based upon your observations, predict how each instrument will sound, and then they have a chance to experiment with it. Okay, and they're going to write down or talk about their observations, whichever one you would want them to do, depends on your 2nd graders. Typically my 2nd graders do not write things down, especially in my music room. Got it? So if they spend 2 minutes doing this at each station, how much time have we spent on that activity? 10 minutes, okay. So we're up to 15 minutes of class. Maybe 17 minutes of class because we took a couple minutes to divide them into groups and to give instruction on how to rotate around. Okay, so the third part of the lesson, or the third, well after those 2 parts, I would probably divide them into larger groups. So we would have, groups of 4 or 6 or however decided to like do that. And then they're going to talk about, like based upon your experimentation, your experiment with those instruments, did the instrument produce the sound the way you thought it would? Did it sound like you thought it would? And then how did each instrument produce sound?
And how are you going about are they just talking within their groups, or are you going to each individual group saying what did each student think? Or
we're going to get there.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just outlining this lesson for you, how it would look. So typically, it would be, they would have their own groups and they would be talking within their group.
And
I would be facilitating, what?
You trust them to like talk about that and stay on task usually?
Well, if they're only spending a minute on it, they have to,
Okay, yeah.
right? If they're only spending 2 minutes on it, they have to.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
remember that attention spans of students are however many minutes their age is on average. So if they're in second grade, they're probably, what, 7 or 8? So if we're spending 2 minutes at each thing, they're going to be okay. Okay? So we're in this activity. So we're spending about 5 minutes drawing conclusions, right, about what we just did, the experiments that we just did. And this is within their groups, and then we would have a discussion about it as a class. So that would probably take about 5 minutes. So we're up to how many minutes now?
20.
20? Yes? So typically I would see my students for about 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes at a time. So for the last 10 minutes, I would probably demonstrate each instrument for them correctly, and then allow them to play it in small groups again, and we would rotate around. So that would be about a 10-minute thing, because I would spend about 1 minute demonstrating each instrument. There's 5 different ones, right? And then I would let them spend 1 minute playing it in their group of 3. So we're up to how many minutes now?
40.
Not 40,
35.
30. Because we just spent 5 minutes for me going 1 minute at each instrument, explaining and demonstrating. And then we did what? 1 minute for them to share and play it. And then we would rotate around. Keep in mind that I would also have like Clorox wipes so they could wipe it off, you know, so they're not like transferring germs and that sort of thing. So, okay. You just stuck your tongue out.
It's gross.
What? It's not that. It's not gross.
Kids are so dirty.
So are adults.
Yeah.
So, you know, like there's that. Yeah.
That's good. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. You can like even have hand sanitizer. Or you could even like collect 30 Coke bottles if you wanted to. And use that as like the thing. Or 30 like toilet paper rolls.
Oh, so they could each play their own
Yeah.
game?
So I mean you could totally do that as well. That's easy to do and cheap. And you can still categorize the different instruments by the way they produce sound if you wanted to. So you can think about it that way as well. Okay, so that's my entire lesson right there. Now it's up to us to formulate a lesson plan to give to a substitute if we wanted to. It has to be detailed enough to give to somebody else so they can like actually do this lesson. Okay, so if you think back, what, a month and a half ago, we talked about lesson plan construction, right? And then every lesson plan has to have a name, date, title, and a grade level on the front or the top of the page. The next thing that happens is what?
Name, grade, title, and what? I'm sorry.
Date. Objectives, right? So objectives that are what? Written in student-friendly language. So like I can statements or students will blank. So here's what I would like to do. I would like to put U3 in a group, U4 in a group, U3 in a group, and then U3 in a group. So your task right now is to develop the objectives for this lesson. So it has to have a musical objective, and it has to have an objective from another subject area. What subject area are we dealing with?
Do we not get to choose?
No, it is science, and why would you say science?
Isn't there classifying things?
Classifying, and they're actually using what?
The scientific method.
Okay, so I'm teaching scientific, this is a second grade version of scientific method. You're not going to have them develop a research question and hypothesize. I'm not going to do that in second grade, okay? But I am going to have them observe, predict, experiment, and evaluate, or conclude. So I can do that in second grade. So, get in your groups, you'll have about like maybe 2 minutes to develop 2 different objectives. Students will blank. They will be able to blank.
Is this the lesson? Like, should we write it on a separate piece of paper?
I would probably write it down, yes. This is your assignment 9.
Okay. So name.
And also think hard about what musical concept we're talking about today. It's not instrument families. It's one of these different elements. Which element are we talking about?
What does it say?
Sound, I would totally agree with that. And underneath that umbrella of sound, we're talking about one specific thing. We're exploring what? Yeah,
Explain what? Timbre.
timbre or tone color.
Do you have to do it the same grade?
It has to be second grade. Just write some stuff down. Just
Okay.
like students will blank, yeah. And only one person in the group has to write, really. So,
Mhm.
Identify and understand.
It has to be like salary or something.
we'll go over that. This is your time to develop and then we'll discuss the objectives.
Yes.
Okay.
Students will use instruments to. Accentuate the second grade.
Students will instrument.
And remember, these objectives are objectives that you should be able to put on your board or turn into I can statements. So make sure that they're in student-friendly language. Okay?
Yeah.
By having a sound, instruments will produce.
Or to like recognize it. Students will be able to,
So what have you got so far?
using scientific-
Elizabeth, what have you all come up with?
Students will be able to use the scientific method to identify sound.
Okay, and what's your other objective? Because you have to have two, right? You have to have a musical one and a scientific one.
Well, our students will be able to predict, observe, and conclude the sounds that the instruments make.
Okay, so we've got two different things that we're doing. Observation and categorization and exploring. Yes? So I would probably say students will explore instrument sounds. That's a second grade objective that I could put on my board, yes? Do you think students would be able to read that and understand that in second grade? Yeah. Instrument sounds. Yeah. And then the second objective would be what?
Scientific method.
Students will use the scientific method to categorize instruments. Right? Is that what we're doing? So these are typically very short and sweet, to the point.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next thing that we have in our lesson plan are the state and national standards that substantiate what we do. These are the things that drive what we do in our classrooms. I don't know if they should all the time, but that's what the state says that we have to do, right? So, Kentucky Core Academic Standard for Science in second grade is students understand scientific ways of thinking and working and use those methods to solve real life problems. That's their scientific method plug for second graders. So that's why it's not quite like that whole like 5-step scientific method that you've read about in your science courses. So we're just using that deductive reasoning process to understand and categorize these different instruments. And then music standard number 1, listening to, describing, and analyzing music. And actually the National Association for Music Educators, NASME, just came out with a whole brand new system of standards that go along with core content. It's their answer to the Common Core. So we're just going to use these 9 overarching standards that they still have in place. Okay? So just keep in mind that your music teacher might have very specific standards like you would have for each subject. So math, it's not just math, it's not just geometry, it's like we're using this one specific standard in geometry. So we have those for music now too. So the next thing that I would have on my lesson plan is a rationale. You do not have to do this, so don't worry about it. Got it? Keep in mind that this lesson plan up here is not exactly what we just did. So it's going to be different. I just wanted you to see the format for this. So the next thing that we have on our lesson plan is the management framework. This tells me exactly how much time I'm spending on each different activity. It does not provide detail. This is a pitfall that a lot of students fall in. It doesn't provide detail. It's just an overview. So the first part, what happened at the very first? We did what? Set out the instruments. So I would say 2 minutes. Well, I would have the instruments already set out before they came to class. So I'd say 1 minute dividing into groups, right? And then how much time did we spend at each instrument? Observing.
Like a minute.
1 minute. So how many minutes total for that one activity? 5 minutes of observation in groups.
Would you even need to put, well, yeah, never mind. About that 1 minute dividing them into
The 1 minute and dividing them into groups comes in the procedural section of my lesson plan. This is just letting me know exactly how many minutes I'm spending on each activity. And this is really for me as the teacher to implement as many different changes in the one lesson that I can. I would never spend a whole half an hour on one thing. Okay? So if it's a second grade lesson, I would probably have 4 or 5 different things going on in the lesson at once, all towards the same end. Okay? So this is for me to just see really quick how that's divided up. So the next thing that we did is what? We spent how much time experimenting with the instruments? What?
2 minutes each.
2 minutes each,
10
so
minutes.
that's 10 minutes, right? So it's 2 minutes at each instrument, so I would say 10 minutes of exploration of instrument sounds or something there. However you decide to do that.
And like discussion and stuff?
That comes later, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we should only have 15 minutes so far, correct? So we've got, or maybe 16 minutes. So divide them into groups, and then we have what else? Observation, and then experimentation. So we're up to like 16 minutes or so. I probably wouldn't include that 1 minute of like dividing them into groups. I would just do it really quick, and let's just go. And so, the next thing that we did was what? We talked about.
Getting into larger groups and discussing and drawing conclusions.
Yeah, so we were getting into larger groups and discussing what our that's the conclusion stage of our lesson, right?
Yeah.
So, and how much time did we spend doing that? About 5 minutes. So I would say 5-minute group discussion on conclusions, just keep it really simple. And notice how I'm listing the time at the very beginning of each one of those bullet points. Okay? So the last activity that we did was what? I gave a demonstration on each instrument, and then I had them do what? What? Play them correctly, yes. So I would say 5-minute teacher demonstration on each instrument, and then a 5-minute group play. So they would have the ability to play, that sort of thing for each one. Okay? So there's our 30 minutes or 31 minutes, however you want it to be. And typically I saw my students for 30 to 45 minutes at a time. So remember, I always would warm up in my class, but if you could do this in your actual second grade classroom as a science lesson, a legitimate science lesson. Yes? I think so. I would hope so. I think it would be a really good idea. Okay. So that's the management framework. The next thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to list your strategies that you're using in this lesson. So I have listed a couple here: student investigation and cooperative learning. What other things could you say? Teacher-led discussion. What else? Student demonstration, right? There's several things that you could list here if you wanted to. Okay, so the next part of your lesson plan will be the procedural part of your lesson, procedures. So you have an introduction, body, and a closure. What is the purpose of the introduction or preliminary experience? Activate their prior knowledge. Or give them a what? Point of reference from which to build the rest of the lesson. So that 1 minute at each station where they just observe, that's giving them a point of reference from which to explore and play the instruments later. Because they're going to be talking about what they observe with other students. So it's a checks and balances system. Yes, ma'am?
When you're doing that first initial observing, are they like touching the instruments?
No, they're just looking.
Okay.
Looking at what they're made out of, predicting how they will play, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So here's the deal. In the introduction, I want to have enough detail in this so that a substitute teacher could come and do this lesson and not have any questions about how to do it at all. So here's where I would say, first bullet, put out instruments, 5 different instruments around the room. Second bullet, divide the students into groups of 2 or 3. Third bullet, teacher will explain how to answer those first questions. And then I would list the questions within the context of the introduction. Fourth bullet, teacher will rotate every minute, groups every minute, while checking and facilitating group work correctly. So I would be in the middle of this room and looking to make sure that they're still on task. And they're only spending about a minute doing this, so they should be, I would hope. So the body of the lesson is where the majority of your content is going to be. Okay, I'm just going to scroll through this because I've included the questions in there. So
Do you include the questions we need? Oh, not the, okay.
I would include the questions that I wanted them to answer in my lesson plan. And I would even recommend for you all, for your final micro teaching, to get so detailed that you're actually almost scripting your lesson. So teacher will say this, students will have this amount of time to answer. What's that going to help you do?
Not ramble.
Okay, so not ramble, also provides a guide, and you're going to meet that time limit because you're going to be able to time yourself. Yes, ma'am?
This might sound like a really stupid question, but if there's not a clock in the room or you don't have a timer, how do you know? Because a minute is so fast. And I know for me, like if I wasn't strictly paying attention to just time, which you can't just watch the clock for a minute, I would lose track of time. How do you, as a teacher?
I would set a timer.
Okay.
If I was going to use rotate and have it that would be my timer. Okay, you have this amount of time, go. When you hear the thing, go to the next instrument station. You would have this amount of time.
Okay.
Switch. Yeah, and then the same thing with the 2-minute thing.
So it's not weird to use a timer?
What?
It's not weird to use
I don't think so.
timer.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably use it on my phone, so it's like this nice dun, 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 you know. But, so, and not like, wah, 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 you know. But, I mean, something to I don't think that's weird at all.
Okay.
In fact, I think that's better than saying, oh, okay, you know, well, I had more time on this instrument than the last time. I didn't have enough time, you know. So it's very strict, you have this amount of time in each one. And this is the fair way to do things. Yes?
Would you ever use one of the online timers that they have?
Sure. If I wanted to project it on a smart board, just do it like that. Sure, why not?
I just think that would be a distraction for the student.
It might. And the other thing is I feel like maybe sometimes there would be a little pressure if I could see that countdown. So, but I mean that's up to you and your class, you know. So I might do something like that if I wanted to. But typically it would just be a sound cue. Or I could even put on a silent timer and play something or go. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. So it's whatever you want to do and however you want to manage your own classroom. I just use the timer on my phone because it's that easy. You know, just start, stop. So the body of the lesson is where you would have the details, right? So I'd like for you to get back into your groups really quick, and you have maybe 3 minutes to talk about how you would write the body of this lesson plan down. It has to be detailed enough that you could give it to somebody else and they could read it and have no problems doing this. The body of the lesson plan includes the 2-minute exploration at each station. It includes answering specific questions that we talked about earlier, and I'll put those questions up here. And it also talks about like the teacher-led demonstration of each instrument. Or I'm sorry, the conclusion section where we talked about how we would categorize each one of those. Right? So we had that like putting them into bigger groups so they could talk about that, those questions.
So the conclusion of the lesson is kind of also still in the body.
What?
The conclusion of the lesson is still in the body.
We haven't gotten to the closure yet. Because that's like the teacher demonstration of each instrument and the students get to play them.
Oh.
Yeah. So here's that. Those questions.
So steps 2 and 3 are in the body.
Correct.
So first we're observing, then we predicting.
In the body, we're just predicting and concluding.
Or, no, they're doing that while they're in the group. Yeah.
Remember, this has to be detailed enough that you could give it to a substitute and they could do this lesson without any questions whatsoever.
The students in their groups observe, decide how they get to play, and talk amongst each other for a minute. Oh, we don't need any time, so. So yeah, so first one gives me, well, for the first part, they're only on 1 minute, right? Yeah. Well, we only do 1 minute first. Oh, right. Good. Yeah, we have the first one.
Get each group to predict how each stuff.
And so, in the groups, we do.
Okay, so let's talk about a few of these really quick. So first thing that you would do is what? Divide the, well, they're already divided, right? Because they were still in their groups at this point. So they had, during the introduction or preliminary experience, they had 1 minute at each, so we took about 5 minutes to do that, yes? The second thing is what would you have to do? What?
Like bigger groups?
Not yet. Remember, we're still in step 2. So this is where they actually get to experiment. In each. So I would say, now's your chance to explore the different instruments. You may have a chance to play them for 2 minutes apiece. And write down or remember how you played them. Okay? Yes?
Mm-hmm.
So that would take about 5 minutes. And then, so I would have a timer and I would say explicitly, after every 2 minutes, I would set a timer for 2 minutes and they would rotate around. Okay? So So it would be detailed enough for somebody to read that and say, this is exactly how I would do it. The next thing would be what?
We're gonna divide them into larger groups.
So put them in larger groups and then have them do what?
Draw conclusions and discuss.
And I would include those questions. So based upon your experiment, did the instrument actually sound the way you thought it would? And have them do that. And that would be about a 5-minute discussion. And then we would come back together, and then I would say, what?
Let's have a class discussion.
Okay, let's have a class discussion, and what would we discuss?
The questions that they just answered.
Okay, so what am I trying to get them to do? Categorize instruments based upon how they produce sound. So I would probably just lead a discussion about that specific thing. So they're categorized by how they produce sound. How did you produce sound on this instrument, this instrument, this instrument, and this instrument, and why it works the way it does. Okay? A Coke bottle is a woodwind instrument because I have to do what? Blow across the surface to get it to produce sound. Yes? So that sort of thing. And then I would talk about maybe a few other different instruments like the flute and the saxophone or that sort of thing. And you all are knowledgeable enough, I hope, to lead a discussion like that. So the next thing would be what? I would spend 1 minute at each different instrument giving a demonstration of how it's played correctly. So for the Coke bottle, if we're talking about that, I would blow into it, play it, and then I would probably put some water in it to shorten it. So if I'm shortening it, what's it going to do to the sound? It's going to raise the pitch up. So we'll talk a little bit about that maybe. And then I would go to the guitar or the homemade banjo, and I would play that by plucking, bowing, or strumming, right? And we would talk about how the different string lengths produce different sounds. So I would have about a minute at each one of those to do that. Yes? So then I would do what? Divide them back into their smaller groups and give them a minute at each instrument to try it out and play it. And that would be, like, those two things would be the closure for my activity. Yes? So if I was going to ask them questions that I wanted them to answer in that group discussion before we got done, I would have those written out in my lesson plan. When I say detailed, I mean detailed to the letter. Exactly what I'm doing at every single step of the way. That's why I would suggest that you might script your lessons so that you know exactly what to say and when to say it. So after I do the procedures, I'm going to go down to I'm going to have an assessment portion. And I'm going to state exactly how I'm going to assess my students. So there's 3 different types of assessments, broad categories. What are they? 3 different types of assessment. Formative, that's one. Summative and diagnostic, right? Okay, so typically these lessons are going to be informal, formative-based assessments. So summative assessment is like a midterm or a final. It's at the end of a unit of study. So you're not going to have any of those in this class for our purposes in this class. You're not going to do any of those. So diagnostic assessments, you're not going to give a pre-test before you get up to teach. So it's not going to be a diagnostic assessment. It's going to be a formative assessment more than likely in here. And if it's not, then we'll talk about it, but it should be, yes.
I know that this particular one said something at the beginning about like a worksheet.
Yes, it did. This one has a worksheet that goes with it. I might do that if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I might not do that. If I was in my music classroom, I wouldn't have a worksheet. If I was in a regular ed classroom, I might.
Would that be considered diagnostic a little bit? If you're having them, or that's just more like
It's a formative if they're doing it throughout the lesson, which is what they would be doing here. So that's why it's a formative assessment.
It's just
So while they're doing group work, I'm going around and assessing them throughout the lesson. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
And then I would have a materials section where I would list what?
The materials needed.
Right, which are what for this lesson? Instruments, thank you. Also, if I needed something to clean them off with or that sort of thing. Okay. Now is your chance to ask me questions about how to make a lesson plan. This is the only day that I'm going to go through this. Okay? So now is your chance to ask me questions if you have questions about this process.
So when we're doing this, we could hypothetically just go in, take out your information and copy and paste our own information.
Yes.
And it can be in this exact order.
In this, I want it in this format. That's exactly what I want you to do, is go in and erase all of my information and use this as a template.
Are there other, like, the lesson plans that you've been posting, are they in this format? Are they all in this format?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you say that you did or didn't want us to have a rationale?
You don't have to have a rationale.
Okay.
No.
And
Yes.
then I noticed on Blackboard that our assignment 9 is turning in a lesson plan
Correct.
with our group.
Correct.
Is that still due on Wednesday morning?
It is due right now, and you just got your points for it.
Oh. Okay.
You're so nice.
It's much easier for me to grade this way. So, so does that make sense? So if you were not here today, that sucks to be you. And we'll talk about that then. We'll have to make that up later. So, got it? So, good job for coming to class on Monday morning. All right, so we're going to leave this for now, and then we have exactly 8 minutes. So I'm going to take 7 minutes, and we're going to do a little bit of work with this, and then we're going to do some more work with this on Wednesday. So I have listed here 3 different subject areas, and our elements of music. Okay? So we're going to talk through some of these and exactly what we've done so far this semester. So I've done a few integrated lessons with you. Yes? So let's talk through them. So the first one we did was the shape detective. What was the musical objective for the shape detective? Was it harmony, melody, rhythm, form, or sound? Rhythm. And what math concept was it?
Shapes.
Shapes, or geometry, right? Because and what grade level did we have it for? Kindergarten, right. So the musical concept not only is rhythm, it was what, specifically? What? It was a steady beat activity, right? You may not do a steady beat activity for your final micro-teach.
I'm sorry, which one is this?
Look high, look low, shape detective on the go. Circle,
Okay.
triangle, rectangle, square. You can find shapes anywhere. It was that one. So I taught a rhythmic poem and an ostinato, and we were working on steady beat, and we were also working on geometry at the exact same time. It was taught co-equally. What about swimming?
That was 4.
Why was that form?
No.
Swimming was reading, wasn't it?
Swimming was reading.
Reading.
What specifically about reading? Is it more like language arts, actually? It was 2 different things. It was language arts and reading.
Because we were doing the order.
So sequencing, which is a component of reading underneath the comprehension umbrella. There are 5 different aspects to reading instruction. And they are phonemes, how letters sound and look. They are phonemic awareness, which is how letters sound together. And it's also the #1 indicator of reading of literacy, by the way. If you can segment or sequence letter sounds together, you're able to read. Okay? They are fluency, which is the rate and speed at which you read, and the expression and inflection, vocabulary and comprehension, right? So if I was doing like a sequencing lesson, that would be underneath the comprehension umbrella of reading. Also, think about what else we did with the swimming lesson. We used different what? We had 3 categories of words, and each category had what in it?
Dynamics. That, like we were using like fast.
Okay, so we're using verbs, adverbs, and prepositions, right? So that was another thing that we could put under like parts of speech underneath language arts. So what was our musical concept for that?
Melody?
It wasn't melody.
Form.
I would probably put it underneath the form umbrella. And why would I do that? Because I was depicting through locomotor and non-locomotor movement how the story happened. So I would put that underneath the form umbrella over here. So we've got, what did we say? We said sequencing, That's not working at all anymore. Sequencing and form. We could do fluency and what? The rate and speed at which people read. If I wanted to do a poetry unit and incorporate fluency and music, what do you think I could, what? Yeah, so I could have them notate rhythm and notate the poem. So I could do fluency here. Whatever. What if I wanted to do a science lesson on melody? How do you think I could do that? What if I wanted to do a 5th grade science lesson about melody?
Planets. We could do something with the planets.
Okay, and what musical concept would go with the planets for 5th grade?
I thought you said we were working for melody or harmony.
Melody,
Yeah,
science, 5th grade, and planets is what your suggestion was.
Yeah.
What would I do? Because planets are not, I mean, planets are a scientific concept, you're exactly right. But I have to, remember, I have to teach about melody and the planets at the exact same time, in some cohesive way.
I didn't think this through.
Okay,
Going
so
for
let's erase that, and let's not use the planets.
It's just getting quiet.
I just kind of want to like stab myself too with the planets. That was a final project last semester that somebody else had my students do,
Yeah.
and it was not the best. Anyways, and like the whole thing, the theme was planets. And I just wanted to like cry a little bit. So what if I did a lesson on acoustics and melody? And we were talking about amplitude and the way the different waves and stuff are shaped, how sound is made through vibration. I could do that.
Mixing sound and melody.
I think it would be, if I wanted to do a melodic thing, I could teach them a, actually I would probably use like a trumpet or something and play a melody on the open partials, because those have very specific shapes to them. And I could show it that way if I wanted to. You're right, I could also do that underneath sound if I wanted to do that, like a timbre exploration. Okay? But highs and lows are typically underneath melody and not under sound. Because sound is more like how each individual instrument, like the timbre of each
I was
one.
thinking of the wave because.
Sound, you're thinking sound waves.
Yeah.
Right. Not, I would probably still put that underneath melody.
Okay.
Yeah. What if I wanted to do harmony and math? What could I do? What about pattern recognition in 2 different parts? What about phrase length? If I wanted to teach them a canon and say these 4 measures plus these 4 measures equal 8 measures, and then we're going to repeat this again.
Could you go over like time signatures? And
Sure, why not? Why couldn't I do that?
Would they know about that?
What is it?
Would they like be able to?
Sure.
They'd have that already.
If I wanted to
for, like-
teach fractions or time signatures, which is really what you're talking about, teaching fractions, parts of a whole, that's 4th grade, which they would already know about time signatures to begin with, because I teach that in 3rd or 4th grade, depending.
Okay.
And then that would go underneath what? Rhythm, though, and math. So I'm talking about harmony and math. So there's different ways to think about all of this. We're going to explore this a little bit more on Wednesday, and I'm going to give you time to explore with your partner on Wednesday, maybe some ideas that you would like to do for your final micro-teach.
Does it have to be those 3 subjects? Or can we-
No, you can use, I'm glad you brought that up, you can use the multicultural music stuff that we talked about earlier, as long as you follow the guidelines that were on the Prezi.
Okay.
Okay? But I would like it typically to be in one of these 3. It's really 4 subjects because language arts and reading are kind of separated. So, yes. Any questions about this? We're going to do this some more on Wednesday. We've got about a minute left, and this is your time to, oh, yes, sorry.
I just have a quick question in conjunction with this in our lesson plan. When we're like say choose reading, we need to on our lesson plan include the Common Core numbers or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is
So
that
whenever
what
you
you're
get done like thinking about a concept, what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, what standard substantiates that
And
concept?
that goes under objectives.
Yes. So, well, no, that goes under, yes, it does. You're right.
Okay.
It goes,
So like
yeah.
I can do such and such and then Common Core numbers, how that ties in.
Correct.
Okay. Just checking.
Somebody push play on or record on that.
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Will you stop that for me? Thanks. I was just like,